You're listening to the Soccer Podcast USA. This week's guest is none other than the sometimes intense, but always straightforward NWSL head coach of Racing Louisville, Bev Yanez.
I'm very proud of every single one of you. Look at the scoreboard, okay? Nobody comes to our house and gets any points, ever. You put it on in front of a record-breaking crowd with planes flying over. Now enjoy some fireworks and kick your feet up tonight. I'm very proud of you.
Everyone, welcome to Soccer Podcast USA. I am Christina, Unkel, host of this show, and joining us today is none other than Bev Yanez. I would say, because I used to be Banez, it's Yanez, head coach at Racing Louisville. Did I say your last name correct? Because everyone says it differently.
Yes.
Okay.
You did.
It's supposed to have an accent and an enya with it too, right?
No, so some people, you said it right the first time. It's actually Yanez, but some people say it differently. But it's fine. However it comes, I'm still attentive and I answer. So
I love it. Well, being attentive, I loved that. Bringing in the players in. We know people want to run through the wall for a coach. For many of those who might not know, Beverly has been a pioneer of the game here in the United States. Crazy. People may not know what the WPS was, women's professional soccer, way back. She was drafted third in the 2010 draft, and then won the championship with Western New York Flash, which is now North Carolina Courage. Whole kind of story we can get behind later, but has been part of soccer here in the U.S. Before leaving and then coming back for the NWSL. So, Bev, in this conversation, really wanted to kind of get to starting with your playing career, right? Right now you're a head coach, but love to address your playing career. And kind of at the get-go, like you stepped in, WPS finally formed after we hadn't had women's professional soccer for years after WUSA. What did that feel like when you left college and you finally stepped into professional soccer in that beginning?
Yeah, and I think for myself, and obviously I want to say thank you for having me. I think so highly of you, this podcast, and everything that you contribute to the women's game in itself. So thank you for having me. As far as my playing career goes, I think the first part of it all is I didn't really have a league growing up to look to. It was more of the national team, right? And then particularly in the 1999 Women's World Cup in Pasadena, California, being from SoCal, got to watch that game. And that's kind of where the dream really ignited and kind of took flourishing, if you will. And when I first got drafted out of the University of Miami to play in the WPS, my thoughts were incredibly excited at the idea that there was an opportunity for me to pursue my career. For the longest time, it was, what will I do when I get to that point? If I get to that point, if I've been chosen, if I've worked hard enough to get there. It was so much doubt of, is there going to be a league? Is there not going to be a league? Am I going to have to go overseas? So obviously being able to play in my home country was incredibly important for me. And being able to come in as a rookie and play in Washington and then post that go to Western New York Flash for a small amount of time. It was just really an incredible opportunity to be a part of that start of the WPS in some capacity and help obviously continue to push the game in such a positive manner. A lot of who I am today is a lot of self-reflection during that time of the league still growing. I remember going from college to the pros and feeling like I had taken a step backwards financially. And I remember thinking, this is something I've wanted all my life. It's okay. Everything's going to work out. Everything's going to be just fine. But had an amazing host family that took really good care of me, allowed me to be able to support myself while chasing this dream at the same time. And to see where the game is today is just so incredibly special to be able to reflect on those times and remember as a player what it was like, and to see how it's continued to progress has been really special.
Yeah, host family. Not many people knew that back in the day you all had to have host families because which is great. Many people don't realize and think that professional women athletes and soccer players in the United States have always had their housings taken care of. So thank you for being a pioneer of the game. I think many of you guys, I call you guys the OGs, the original gangsters, for putting through years of not being paid. Now it's time for you guys to get paid. So thank you for that. One of the things that was interesting, because I know we all held our breath, every 3 years, is the league going to exist? Is the league going to exist? Right. And that 3 year was kind of a little bit of the death knell. During that time period, you did leave the United States and you played in Japan. What was that experience like, playing women's professional soccer in another country during that time period?
Yeah, no, and I thank you for the comments about the pioneer. I know I'm 0.01% of so many that have fought and that continue to fight. So I really appreciate that, and I take a lot of pride in my small contribution during that time. But yeah, I think it was absolutely devastating, right? The league at that point, and not a lot of people know, it was like 6 months long. So after the 6 months was up, 6 to 7 months. After that was up, you would go find another job because you stopped being paid at that time. So you would go find another job to make steady income, to obviously be able to support yourself, but then also train during that time. So I had to buy a membership to the gym. I had to pay for private trainings, like this type of stuff. So I had to go make money to be able to support that, to come in fit to play again. So even just the progression for the league, for these players being paid like January through December and being paid like for the full year, is something like so amazing to me, right? And so of course deserved. But during that time, I remember waking up probably a week before preseason was about to begin. I want to say give or take. And my agent called me and said, the league's just folded. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And he's like, the league's folded. Like and my first thought was not that I didn't have a job. My first thought was like, I want to play football. And now it felt like it was taken from me and so many others during that time. And I remember just feeling so empty about what's the next step. I have to play football. I love football. This is all I want to do. So what is that next step for me? Well, at the time I was signed to play with Sky Blue FC. That's who they were at the time. And they still had a trip planned to Japan. And the trip was still going to occur because it was so late. It was a preseason trip and we had already committed. So everybody who wanted to still go, they asked and kind of took a poll. Do people still want to do this trip? And everybody was like, yeah. And at the time it was like the McCalls, Zerbonis, like these types of players that were like, yeah, of course. We're going to. So we all decided.
Still at it, by the way. Still.
Yes,
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. So we were like, yeah, absolutely. We want to go. No one wants to think about the fact we don't have a job and can't play football. So we all went. We played our first match against INAC Kobe. And I remember being out on the pitch, and the way they were playing football from a technical and tactical perspective, like blew my mind. I was out on the pitch. I remember looking over at the ref and saying, excuse me, how much time's left? We're getting absolutely bopped about here, just let me know how much time's left so I could process this all. And that was really it. After that game, they invited 4 of us to training, and I was one of the 4. And I was like, well, I can't wait to see what they do at training if that's the way they played in a match versus us. And then after that, 2 of us were given long-term contracts to come and compete for the season. And I was one of the 2. And so that's really how it worked out. I stayed there, really felt like I developed a technical and tactical side of my game. And that's really where the coaching pieces kind of opened up. At that point, I was 23, 24 and realized, wow, like, I'm learning so many aspects of my game I felt I have missed for so long, and really have enhanced a lot of attributes and kind of identity of who I was as a player there. And I remember thinking how many people out there are like me, where they felt like they've missed so many chunks of their career in specific areas that they felt their game could have been better or improved. And that's where I started getting my coaching licenses. So that's kind of how the whole circle occurred. And Seattle Reign at the time came to play against us and asked me, are you American? I said, yeah, actually. And they're like, are you considering coming back at some point? And that's how I jumped back in to the NWSL.
I love scouting back in the day, right? We didn't have White Scout. We didn't have the videos. Yeah, like we literally rolled up and we're like, wait, there's an American abroad in Japan?
Yes. Wild.
I was I love that, because I was going to ask you that was, is that where you fell in love with coaching? You talk to players and players are like, I'll never coach. And then there's something that happens that just is that trigger. So the technical passion in Japanese football, which it is,
Yes.
actually was my favorite. Team two referee was the Japanese team one, because they were always respectful. Even when you gave them a yellow card, you felt
Yes.
like you wanted to take it back because you felt bad when you carded
Yes.
them. But you also had to watch out because you'd always get hit with the ball because they just dance
Mhm.
around you and make
Yes.
passes that they never should have made. But that technical love for the game, now that you're that coach,
Mhm.
because I have thoughts on it too, but I'd love to know your thoughts on how more advanced the rest of the world is on the technical aspect
Mhm.
versus our American game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it was two things that kind of ignited it for me there at that point was a positional change. I had played midfield most of my career. So as a young child, as a collegiate athlete, as 2 years in the WPS, I was either an attacking mid, I was an 8, or I was a 6. I kind of floated anywhere in and around that space. But when I went to Japan, the 9 had tore her ACL really early of me arriving there.
Mm,
And at the time, the midfield was like uh, it was Homare Sawa, it was Ji Soyeon, and it
mm.
was Shinobu Ono. And it was packed. I mean, I didn't know how I was going to break in, but I was just very excited to be there, right? And the center forward had tore her ACL pretty quickly on from me arriving there, and they asked if I could play center forward, and I'm like, well, I mean, that's a fair question. I'm not sure. Let's give it a
You're
go. I'll
like,
give you.
yes,
Yeah, it was like
I'll
is
figure it
and
out
then
later.
exactly. And then for me, it became like game time or no game time, right? Is number one. Yeah, absolutely. I'll learn as much as I possibly can if it gets me on the pitch. And that really challenged me as an athlete massively because I couldn't comprehend the positional change and how long it felt like it was going to take me during the learning process. It was like sitting in a new seat at a classroom and it's like, wow, I've never seen the game from this perspective before, yet I'm just 5, 6 yards higher. And I remember feeling like at times I had to chase everything and press as a 9 and press everything I possibly could. And I remember after every practice, they would sit down with me. All the players would get around a whiteboard. I had a magnet with my picture on it, and they'd help me move the magnet. And they'd go, if she does this, you do this. If you can't go, you can't. If she goes, you can't go. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. And they would walk me through it. And then we go again and they go, Bev, you work so hard. It's okay. We love that you work so hard, but like, let's work smarter. And I'm like, okay, you guys are right. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. And I remember just feeling so invested in. And so the challenge that I had with having such a positional change and loss of identity while still being an
Mm-hmm.
athlete, and then on top of that, being coached the way I was coached and not being able to go, hey, what am I good at? What am I not good at? I had to actually go and identify that. I had to rewatch film and then link up with what the players were trying to communicate to me. There was no translator. There was no one there to provide me any advice. And watching the exercises, I had to go 3 players back to go, okay, it's 2 touch there, it's 1 touch there, it's okay, perfect. Dribble, pass in the mini goal. Okay, fantastic. Here I go. So my learning was just like, and I remember coming back to the NWSL with such confidence of like who I was as a player, what I wanted out of the game, what I wanted to accomplish, what I felt I could contribute in multiple positions, really embracing my versatility. And that's really why I wanted to start coaching. I knew all of those pieces were like how many players out there that I could help and educate when adversity strikes, in different ways, how I could help. Also, just really feeling like who I was like not answered because I'm not sure I ever like fully knew, but
Yeah.
it was very positive and like this is who I am, this is what I bring. And I felt like for so long throughout my career I'd questioned what it was. What do I bring? Who am I? So
Mm.
yeah, I just feel like I really have the want to provide that in any environment that I'm in. I really value football. I really value the people in football. And I think it's really important that it's a consistent reminder that this is a people industry. So, last year and coming into this season, I've really took a massive focus on how I can continue to build even better relationships with
Mm.
those that I work with and the players because yeah, it's a people industry. You're educating and you're teaching, and you want them to know their roles and hone in on their roles and execute their roles to the best of their ability. And you want to support them through that whole process. And for different players, it means different things. And it's very difficult to, understand those pieces and attempt to find different ways to engage or to teach. But it's really important that you spend the time doing so. And I think in this season, we've done like personality traits tests kind of early on. Is there ways that I can better engage socially, right? and what type of learners do we have and why. So yeah, it's a big piece. I'm a people person in general, and being authentic to who I am and the role is important for me. So finding that authenticity early, and understanding kind of what the environment that I'm looking to help shape alongside the staff and the players is really, really important.
And I think authenticity point, you come back from Japan, you go to Seattle, and you play for who I think is one of the best coaches, or one of the top 5 coaches effortlessly,
Yes.
Laura Harvey. How
Yes.
much did her coaching style, and I always laugh because she's always sitting on that ball, but her coaching style really influence your coaching style now?
Yeah, very smart coach, very willing to build relationships and understand like who she's working with. She made the trainings always very educational, but like fun. You always felt like you wanted to show up to training. It was exciting to go to training. Very good culture, and lots of good players, lots of good people. We're always in and around each other, in her environments. And I always found that incredibly fascinating. So I have a lot of respect for her, and a lot of like what I've taken from a former player in this league, from Laura, from Vlatko, and then obviously my time spent in Japan, and then the early years kind of WPS, and then my time spent as a coach in this league from assistant to this role. I've kind of just combined everything, and then I've brought in former player, and what it was like to be in the league in that space, and have kind of molded what I believe is authentic to who I am and how I would lead and how I would coach. And so I think it's important, now being my second year in the role. There's obviously things in the off season I've self-reflected and feel there's areas that I can be better in. And the main thing for me is not losing who I am, not losing authentically what I can bring, but also taking the time to have that self-reflection. I'm very big on that. I think it should be that way if you're 5 years into it, 6 years into it, 7 years into it, because I think to ask of players to consistently look at themselves and how can we be better? How can we be better individually, collectively? How can we be better? I think we should always be asking the same things from ourselves as a staff. How can we every session, post the session, we all come in and we're like, how could it have been better? Why? Would we have done this differently? Yes. Why? Would we have started the balls at a different spot? Yes. Why? Because we care about what we're providing for the group. And I think it's really important to consistently have that self-reflection and ensure that you are doing everything you can to positively influence the environment for these players to really hone in on what they can bring.
What would you say is like the one thing you're going to be focusing, or one of the things you'll be focusing on after your self-reflection for this season itself as a coach or as a person?
Yeah, I think, and I've never have come out and have spoken about this, but I think it's interesting, right? It's interesting to be in an environment and go from assistant coach to head coach, right? Your role changes, and it's just different. It's different. And so last year, figuring out, okay, this is how it works. This is what it looks like going from an assistant coach into a head coaching role, and still being authentic to who I am. I think coming into this season, the authenticity is something I've really tapped into massively in the off season, and building stronger relationships with the players and the staff, I think was a big one for me. I want to continue to enhance it in every capacity that I can, to understand exactly who needs maybe hey, I need more from you in front of everybody, and who needs the arm around the shoulder and in the office, like, look, come on. I believe in you. I need more from you, right? We're on the same page. Okay, perfect. And finding that fine balance, like when is it in front of everybody? When is it not? It is such a hard balance. And I think it's something not a lot of coaches talk about. Like, we do get it wrong. That's the reality of it. You've got 26 players, you've got 13 staff members. I'm a mother of 2 children, and I'm a wife, and I'm trying to emotionally exert myself in all areas to make sure that I'm aware. Okay, this player needs this player needs that, this staff member needs this, my husband needs this, my children need that. Like, it's very overwhelming. It's incredibly overwhelming, and I don't think enough people talk about it. You're just trying constantly to find throughout a day where you feel so exerted to make sure that you could create the best environment, from the pitch to not on the pitch to in the offices to you never shut off. You never shut off. There's always something to do. There's always something to talk about. There's always something to get ahead of. There's always something to accomplish. So I think in that space, just trying to navigate myself and take a little bit better care of myself, because I so easily forget about all of that, because I'm in a mindset of I need to push this ship in the best direction possible so consistently. And then, okay, really quickly pause. Okay, I'm a mom and here we go. And we're getting the food on the table. And then, oh my gosh, I'm a wife. Okay, you want to go on a date night? When should we go? So it's just like, it's this consistent, like, whoa, at times, to be, fully transparent. It's massively overwhelming, but there's no other, there's nothing else I'd rather do. It's just finding time for myself has been very difficult, and something that I think needs to find of its high importance in my schedule somehow. I'm lucky to work with the staff that I have. I'm lucky to have the group that we have. I feel very, very lucky in that space. And yeah, I really believe I'm only as good as the people around me. So I feel very excited with the staff that I have surrounding me, and how I feel we can really take this group to the next level.
Oh, I feel like you're speaking the truth, because I just finished talking to Coach Denise, our coach here at Tampa Bay. The same questions, like, how do we always make this an incredible environment? And to your point, if you find the secret sauce on how to sliver out a time for just yourself too, from like a mental, let me know. Right now, I'm about to put like a 3-hour block at least once a week that people
Yes.
think I'm in a meeting, and it's just a meeting with myself. I can do whatever I want, read a book, drink a glass of wine,
Good
take a
idea.
bubble bath, not think. So I'm with you on that one. And this player management, and kind of like, to your point, right, there's a whole conversation. I do think that's a completely different piece, right? We've seen so many different environments that can be placed, and also the professionalism that's expected now of professional athletes. It always has been. The women's game has needed to be professionalized. It's now professionalized, and so there's bigger expectations. But from a curiosity standpoint, you mentioned the staff. I think you've done an incredible job in bringing the staff. You've given opportunities to very high level women coaches as well on your staff, which we just talked to Emma, right? How we increase more women at the professional game who are willing to leave the college game, right, and come into the professional game. Done a great job. But the relationship between, and I think this is what people, unless you're in the industry and doing it like we are, that relationship between your general manager and the coach, right? Understanding that. What are some things that surprised you a little bit? I know it could be different in every environment, but that relationship between the GM and a head coach.
Yeah, no, it's really important. It's really important. And it's really important that at least the values and the expectations are known up front. And I think it's incredibly important that those two can work together. They obviously have different roles and responsibilities in it. And so the clarity on that is really important. But I really think if those two can work together, and then obviously some clubs introducing the sporting director pieces, blah, 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 it really means the most cohesive possibility for the team to have success. I'm really big on cohesion, so I really find that relationship to be very, very valuable. And it's obviously, I speak a lot about direction, and have during this podcast. And obviously the ones leading from the top down help steer that ship and give the empowerment to those to steer it. And so I think, the relationship's incredibly important. And like you spoke about, last year when I took the role, I've obviously brought in two former head coaches, right? I've got Carm, who's been incredibly successful in Denmark and Tigres, and in so many ways. And then you've got Mitch, who was a head coach for several years on the men's side. And it was really important for me to have two head coaches in the staff with me. And then obviously returning Sergio as the goalkeeper coach, and then the support staff and the wider staff, and all the impact that they've had. But it was really important for me because I wanted to be challenged. I want to all be very understanding of the experience itself. It's very unique, and everybody says it, and it's so true. You don't know what it takes to be a head coach until you are a head coach. And that's the reality of it. That's the reality of it. In every way, shape, and form, you have no idea until you do it, and you're like, wow, this is wow. This is amazing. This is so hard, right? There's so many emotions that come along with it. But it was really important for me to have two people that know exactly what it's like. around me so consistently. And I've just been so happy. They've contributed so massively to what we're trying to achieve here. But yes, I think from the top down, it's got to be as cohesive as possible. And I think it's really important to understand that as a former player, I remember walking into environments and being like the GM and the head coach, wow, they couldn't be more opposite. Like, you can't hide it, can you? Looking at a staff and going, wow, they couldn't be more. And, they're all over. You can see it, you can feel it, you can read it. It's really important for me that that's not the case. As much as possible, that's not the case. So yeah, I think the cohesion around everybody just doing exactly what we can to influence the group as much as possible is really important.
Bringing in that experience, one thing that was very interesting to me is seeing kind of your guys' season roster. BFC was the other team, but they just signed a player today. That you guys have not signed a current professional player during your time period. And one would think you signed some of those more. You've gotten some, right, either through free agency or basically through a trade. Like, how, I guess from your side, on the technical side, the game here in the US, right? You have some loans in Canada already happening. How are you finding that mix of being able to find those players and growing the game here, the women's game in the United States, with these types of trades and player acquisitions?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's always interesting, right? Everybody's looking for example, we got Emma Sears last year in the draft at the 28th pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And seeing what she's done in one season, obviously, and with the national team now, and seeing her potential and her ceiling just so high in so many ways. When you're building the roster, you're like, okay, what other players are out there like that with now no draft in place, right? And you see it, pretty consistently when the draft was here versus now. Obviously, this is everybody's first year with no draft, where a player comes in and there's a player that surprises everyone, right? Multiple players in some capacity as well, outside of the top picks, that just surprise players and surprise everyone. And so I think when you're building it, you're going like, young and hungry. What type of additions are you looking for? Where are you looking for the additions to be? What type of additions are you looking for? And there's so many questions to be answered. But in that time, you can't help but ignore, like, young players coming in and just competing, and how will they kick off, right? And in what sense will that look like? And so, yeah, I think we've done a really good job. I've aligned myself pretty early. Very grateful for everything that Ryan has done for the club, and obviously his departure off to Kansas City, and having Caitlin come in when she came in the off season, our interim GM, and working really closely with her of where we're looking to add to the roster and why. And then working heavily with our data analyst, our video analyst, and then obviously the assistant coaches to identify these players from a recruitment process standpoint. And I think that's been really, really smooth for us this offseason to kind of get into a rhythm and really understand where we are looking for those. And the big piece for us is always the culture. So once we get to a point where we have high interest in a player for multiple reasons, it's always phone calls to their college coaches, phone calls to wherever avenues we feel we can get the best character culture type of checks. And those have been really, really important for us in this process of bringing additions to the roster in general. So, yeah, we feel very, confident coming into the season, and very excited for those that we've added. But that's really a little like sneak peek, if you will, at the process itself.
Oh, it's a fascinating process. And so there's two final questions I'll have from you is one, at least I'll start with this one. You now being in this position, looking at technical, making decisions on players, what piece of advice would you give a player on saying, how do you put yourself in the best position to be identified by a coach such as yourself?
I think it depends on the club and kind of what they're looking for. So, for example, when I'm looking to identify players, I'm looking for kind of the performance anchors that we operate in, and I'm looking for a very clear character in regards to what they look like on the pitch. So if they lose it, what's their reaction? Because we all know nobody's perfect, and there's going to be multiple times that you lose the ball, but what's your reaction look like and why? How quick is it? How physical is it? There's so many pieces to not just a highlight video. You're looking for who is this player through their clips. Who are they? Without speaking to them, without showing them the city, so really be, I guess, topic of this podcast, like being the authentic player that you are. Like if you're a hardworking player, show it very consistently. Be very authentic in who you are and what you provide. No one's able to go look at a highlight reel. When we are looking at specific things on Y Scout, you're selecting obviously positionally what you're looking for in your style. But you're looking for the authentic player, and you're looking for the most consistency as possible. And that would be my advice, is just be who you are, work hard so that you could showcase all those pieces, even if you're not connecting everything you'd like to. But yeah, that's the biggest piece for me.
Ooh, and then a piece for, we just had Emma Hayes on the first podcast, right? And this talk about encouraging more women to be professional coaches and just to get in the game in the first place to coach. What would be that piece of advice that you would give, especially since you went from a player to a coach, right? There's a lot of players who are a bit on the fence. I just talked to a couple of them recently. Like, what's that piece of advice you'd give them to say whether they should get in the game or not?
I think it's testing the waters out. I think start taking your courses, start getting your licensing, start coaching, start watching other coaches, start getting around the environment as much as possible, and see if it's something that you're even passionate about. To understand where that passion comes from. It's very different than a player. It's different type of stress. It's a different type of altogether. It's different. So understanding if you're passionate about it is step one. And then also I'm a big believer in, obviously I've heard this during our NWSL meetings that we had in Chicago early on. One of the panel members spoke about hiring women on staff, so that they're in certain positions on staff to understand, okay, this is what I want to do someday. And then there automatically the pool's bigger. The pool's already bigger because you have somebody on staff that you're hoping to push at some point to take a bigger role, shall that be what they would like, right? And so I think it's really important to continue to broaden that pool as much as possible. But I think putting yourself out there to understand where your passion lies is really important, because even as much as I knew, and I think that's the hardest part, because you spoke specifically about a player's transition, I think that was the hardest part for myself, is even though I knew I wanted to go into coaching, when the time came, it was still very hard for me. I had lost so much sense of identity. I was like, well, I don't know who I am without like waking up, doing activation, and then running on the field and kicking a ball around. And I still couldn't get it. I still didn't get it, but I knew what I wanted to do. So it felt very confusing to me. So I think through the courses, you find a little bit more identity, you find more passion in just teaching and educating. And that would be my biggest piece of advice.
All right. Well, I got to thank you for your time. I know you're in the mix of preseason. One of the biggest things, and the reason I was like, we have to get Beverly on, was one of our first guests on this podcast. Always respected you as a player, as an individual on the field, from a technical, from, to your point, a personal level. It's tried in and out. And I'm going to use your word authentic, authentic as a player, authentic as a person, and authentic as a coach. So Beverly, thank you for your time here today on the Soccer Podcast USA, and look forward to seeing what you're going to continue to do, because I think you've barely even scratched the surface, and I'm excited to see where your career takes you as a coach now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm so grateful for you having me. So thank you.
Don't forget to follow us on the Soccer Podcast USA as we continue to bring you big names and bold opinions. That's it for our show. See you later.